the stewardship of human wealth, the perpetual sacrifice, the enclosure of the commons, and the question of who owns the future. Introduction. The promise that never arrives. There is a recurring pattern in the history of civilization that is so familiar that we have almost stopped seeing it. A new technology appears. A new institution is created. A new infrastructure project is proposed. A new war begins. A new scientific breakthrough is announced. A new industrial transformation promises abundance. And the people are told that sacrifice is necessary. They are told to tighten their belts. They are told to consume less. They are told to work harder. They are told to accept higher prices, higher taxes, shortages, rationing, displacement, environmental costs, debt, surveillance, or disruption. They are told that the sacrifice is temporary. They are told that everyone will benefit. They are told that the future will be better. And then the future arrives. The technology works. The infrastructure is built. The productivity increases. The knowledge has been accumulated. The war is won. The medicine exists. The machines become capable of producing more with less labor. The new system becomes indispensable. And yet something extraordinary happens. The people who were asked to sacrifice for the transformation frequently do not become the people who own the transformation. The people who created the knowledge do not necessarily own the systems built upon it. The people who finance the infrastructure do not necessarily own the infrastructure. The workers whose labor created the wealth do not necessarily own the productive machinery. The citizens who absorb the costs do not necessarily receive the corresponding benefits. Instead, ownership frequently becomes concentrated in the institutions, corporations, investors, patent holders, landlords, contractors, and other entities capable of establishing control over the newly created productive system. Then, when another transformation arrives, the same population is asked to sacrifice again. This produces a fundamental contradiction at the heart of modern civilization. Humanity repeatedly creates greater productive capacity, without creating corresponding mechanisms for distributing ownership, access, and control over that productive capacity. The result is a peculiar form of perpetual dependency. Technology becomes increasingly capable of liberating human beings from necessary labor, yet human beings remain economically dependent upon selling their labor to whoever owns the technology. Knowledge becomes increasingly abundant, yet access to knowledge can become increasingly mediated by institutions that control its distribution. Medicine becomes increasingly sophisticated, yet essential medicines can remain financially inaccessible. Information becomes nearly impossible to destroy completely, yet civilization can voluntarily destroy physical embodiments of that information in the name of efficiency. Humanity becomes more productive while ordinary people remain economically constrained. The central question, therefore, is not whether technological progress is good or bad. It is, when humanity creates something of extraordinary value, who is it ultimately being created for? And beneath that question lies an even deeper one. Is humanity merely producing wealth, or is humanity acting as the steward of a common inheritance? That distinction changes everything. 1. The difference between creation and ownership. One of the most persistent assumptions of modern economic thought is that the person or institution capable of establishing ownership over an asset is therefore the rightful beneficiary of its value. But creation and ownership are not the same thing. A scientist may discover something. A farmer may cultivate something. A writer may create something. An engineer may invent something. A programmer may develop something. A worker may manufacture something. A government may finance something. A population may sacrifice for something. A civilization may accumulate the knowledge upon which something depends. Yet the eventual owner may be someone who did none of those things. This does not mean ownership is always illegitimate. It means that ownership cannot automatically be treated as synonymous with creation. A corporation can own a factory without having invented the machinery inside it. An investor can own shares without having designed the product. A pharmaceutical company can own intellectual property without having originated the underlying scientific knowledge. A technology company can own a data center without having created the books, scientific papers, languages, mathematics, literature, and cultural knowledge from which its systems derive value. The distinction becomes especially important when the thing being owned is not an ordinary commodity, but a piece of humanity's accumulated knowledge. Some forms of wealth are created once, and can then be reproduced indefinitely. Some discoveries can save millions of lives. Some technologies can transform civilization. Some information represents centuries of accumulated human thought. In those cases, the question of ownership becomes inseparable from the question of stewardship. 2. The perpetual sacrifice cycle. The recurring pattern can be described as a cycle. Collective sacrifice creates productive transformation. Productive transformation creates new wealth. New wealth becomes concentrated through ownership. the resulting benefits are distributed according to ownership, rather than according to the collective contribution that produced the transformation. The majority remains economically dependent. A new crisis or technological transformation emerges. The population is again asked to sacrifice for the promise of a better future, and the cycle begins again. The rhetoric changes, the technology changes, the institutions change, the century changes, but the structure remains recognizable. During industrialization, people were told that machines would increase production. During wartime, people were told to sacrifice, because victory would secure the future. During infrastructure expansion, people were told that public investment would create prosperity. During pharmaceutical development, society was told that scientific innovation would improve health. During the digital revolution, people were told that information would become universally accessible. During the Internet revolution, the world was promised unprecedented communication and knowledge sharing. And now, artificial intelligence is being presented as another extraordinary productivity revolution. Each transformation can be genuinely beneficial. That is precisely what makes the problem more difficult. The thesis is not that these revolutions accomplished nothing. They accomplished enormous things. The problem is that increasing the size of the economic pie does not answer the question of who owns the bakery. 3. The Industrial Revolution: more production did not automatically mean more freedom. The Industrial Revolution is perhaps the clearest early example. Mechanization dramatically increased humanity's productive capacity. Machines could perform work that previously required enormous amounts of human labor. Factories could produce goods on scales that earlier societies could scarcely imagine. Agricultural machinery could increase the amount of food produced per worker. Transportation could move resources and people faster. Industrial organization could coordinate production across enormous distances. The productive achievement was extraordinary, but increased productivity did not automatically translate into economic independence for the people whose labor powered the new system. The existence of a machine capable of replacing 10 workers does not mean those 10 workers become free. It means the productive capacity has changed. Whoever owns the machine determines what happens to the economic value of that productivity. The workers may work fewer hours. They may receive higher wages. They may become unemployed. They may move into different occupations. They may become consumers of the goods they helped produce. But none of those outcomes follows automatically from the technology itself. The technology does not contain a political philosophy. It does not say, the productivity I create belongs equally to everyone. Nor does it say, the productivity I create belongs exclusively to my owner. Institutions decide. That is the fundamental point. Technology expands possibilities. Ownership determines who controls those possibilities. 4. Agriculture and the promise of abundance. Agricultural mechanization presents the same contradiction in another form. Humanity spent thousands of years developing methods of cultivating land, breeding crops, storing food, irrigating fields, managing animals, and transmitting agricultural knowledge from generation to generation. Eventually, machinery transformed agricultural productivity. One farmer could accomplish what once required many people. The promise was abundance, and agriculture did become vastly more productive. But productivity and food security are not identical. A society can possess extraordinary food production capacity, while people remain unable to obtain food. Why? Because producing food and having a right to access food are different questions. The machine can produce. The market determines access. The owner controls the productive asset. The person without ownership remains dependent upon the system. Again, the issue is not whether the machine worked. It did. The question is whether the social organization surrounding the machine converted its productivity into corresponding freedom. 5. War. Sacrifice now, prosper later. The wartime version of this pattern is even more explicit. Citizens are told, there is a war going on. Therefore, consume less, pay more, accept rationing, accept taxation, accept shortages, accept extraordinary government powers, accept industrial redirection, accept debt, accept disruption, accept sacrifice. The explanation is always some version of, we must do this now because everyone will be better off later. This is the logic of guns and butter. The individual citizen is asked to subordinate immediate consumption to a collective objective, and sometimes that sacrifice is unquestionably necessary. The historical question, however, begins after the emergency. Who owns the industrial capacity created by the mobilization? Who receives the contracts? Who controls the corporations? Who possesses the infrastructure? Who retains the accumulated capital? Who benefits from the technological developments? Who receives the institutional power created during the emergency? The war eventually ends. The citizen's sacrifice becomes history. But the institutions built during the crisis can remain. The machinery remains. The corporations remain. The contracts remain. The patents remain. The infrastructure remains. The financial relationships remain. The concentration of economic power can remain. Thus, the extraordinary sacrifice demanded during the emergency can become the foundation for an ordinary economy in which the same people are once again required to sell their labor to systems they do not own. The promise was, sacrifice now so everyone can prosper later. The historical reality can become, sacrifice now so the productive system can be built, then continue working for those who own it. 6. Insulin. When a discovery was explicitly treated as a gift to humanity, the history of insulin offers one of the clearest examples of the distinction between creation, ownership, and stewardship. Frederick Banting, Charles Best, James Calip, and John MacLeod were central to the development of insulin as an effective treatment for diabetes. The historical record is unusually revealing, because the scientists did not simply attempt to maximize their personal ownership of the discovery. On December 19, 1922, Banting, Best, and Calip assigned the Canadian patent for the preparation of insulin to the University of Toronto for a token payment of $1. The University of Toronto's archival record specifically explains that this arrangement was intended to prevent an individual or company from claiming exclusive rights for personal or commercial gain. University of Toronto Collections. Banting's famous formulation of the principle was, "Insulin does not belong to me, it belongs to the world." University of Toronto. This is enormously important. The story is not merely that Banting did not become a billionaire. The deeper point is that he and his collaborators were deliberately resisting the enclosure of the discovery. They were not saying, "I don't want the money, but I hope somebody else gets to control it." The principle was much closer to, "This should belong to humanity, therefore no individual should be permitted to monopolize it." That is stewardship. It is the recognition that certain discoveries are too consequential to be understood solely as private commodities. The discovery of insulin transformed diabetes from a condition that could rapidly become fatal into a treatable disease. The moral significance of the discovery therefore exceeded the personal interests of its creators. And that gives us a powerful test for modern institutions. When the creators of a life-saving discovery deliberately refuse exclusive ownership, what does it mean when later economic structures make access to the resulting medicine financially burdensome? The answer cannot simply be that the market has failed to recognize the value of the discovery. The market has recognized its value extraordinarily well. The question is, who is permitted to capture that value? And who is permitted to access the underlying benefit? 7. The Internet. A different model of technological wealth. The World Wide Web offers another extraordinary example. It is important to distinguish the Internet from the World Wide Web. The Internet was not invented by one individual. It emerged through decades of work by many researchers, institutions, engineers, and communities. But Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web at CERN in 1989, and CERN later made the web software publicly available. On April 30, 1993, CERN placed the web software in the public domain, relinquishing intellectual property rights to the code, and allowing people to use, duplicate, modify, and distribute it. CERN itself describes the decision as a choice between restrictive commercial licensing and making the technology freely available. The institution chose the latter because it was more interested in making something useful than getting rich from it. CERN. This decision matters enormously. Imagine the alternative. Imagine if the fundamental architecture of the World Wide Web had been placed behind a proprietary corporate gate. Imagine if every website had required permission from a private company. Imagine if every hyperlink generated a licensing obligation. Imagine if every browser required a corporate royalty. Imagine if the fundamental ability to publish information online belonged exclusively to one company. The Internet's history demonstrates that another model is possible. A foundational technology can be treated as infrastructure for civilization, rather than merely as an opportunity for exclusive ownership. CERN's account of the Internet similarly emphasizes that the protocols were openly published and usable without licensing or approval, while the institutions surrounding its evolution were designed to be open and inclusive. CERN. This does not mean everything built on the Internet is free. Obviously it is not. There are enormous private corporations built upon Internet infrastructure. There are proprietary platforms. There are subscription services. There are advertising empires. There are privately owned networks and data centers. But the fundamental architecture was not enclosed. And that distinction is crucial. The people who created the web did not merely decline to become wealthy from their invention. They helped prevent the foundational technology from becoming the exclusive property of a single commercial gatekeeper. Again, the point is not merely the absence of personal enrichment, it is the rejection of enclosure. 8. Creation, commons, enclosure, monetization. These examples reveal a recurring historical sequence. Creation, contribution, commons, enclosure, monetization, concentration. Something is created. It is recognized as valuable. It is made available to others. Others build upon it. Its usefulness increases. Institutions discover that control over the resource can generate enormous economic value. Control is established. The commons becomes an asset. The asset becomes monetized. The resulting wealth becomes concentrated. This is the process of enclosure. An enclosure is not limited to land. Knowledge can be enclosed. Software can be enclosed. Medicine can be enclosed. Data can be enclosed. Infrastructure can be enclosed. Cultural production can be enclosed. Scientific discoveries can be enclosed. The question is not whether the original creator was compensated. The deeper question is, who has the power to convert a contribution to civilization into an exclusive source of economic control? That is why the insulin and web examples are so important. Their creators and institutions demonstrated that technological or scientific wealth does not have to be treated as a proprietary monopoly. Alternative institutional arrangements exist. 9. Books. Humanity's memory is not merely raw material. This brings us to one of the most striking contemporary examples, the treatment of books in the development of artificial intelligence. There have been recent reports and investigations concerning large-scale purchases of books associated with AI data acquisition, including reports of books being scanned and then physically destroyed or pulped. A 2026 investigation described a process in which books were purchased, their spines cut, pages automatically scanned, and the physical volumes then pulped. Other recent reporting has documented unusual bulk purchases of obscure books, and concerns among booksellers that some may be destined for AI data extraction and eventual destruction. Zavaviro.com. The precise scale, participants, and circumstances of individual operations matter, and should be established case by case. But the underlying philosophical problem exists regardless. A book is not merely a physical object. A book is a vessel for human thought. It can contain a person's lifetime of research. It can preserve the memory of a community. It can record a vanished language. It can preserve scientific observations. It can contain historical testimony. It can transmit philosophy across centuries. It can preserve knowledge created by someone who died long before the technology extracting its information existed. When a book is converted into machine-readable information, something valuable may indeed have been gained, but something potentially valuable may also have been lost. The physical book is a form of redundancy. It is an independent manifestation of the information. It does not require a data center to remain meaningful. It does not require a subscription. It does not require a power grid. It does not require a network connection. It does not require a functioning artificial intelligence model. It does not require a corporation to continue operating. It can sit quietly on a shelf for 500 years. That is not technological inefficiency. That is resilience. 10. Digitization is not the same thing as preservation. This distinction is fundamental. Digitization is the creation of a digital representation. Preservation is the maintenance of the thing's continued existence and accessibility across time. Those are not identical. A physical book can be digitized, but destroying the book afterward does not necessarily mean humanity has preserved the book. It means humanity has preserved a representation of its contents in a different medium. Whether that representation is sufficient depends upon the architecture surrounding it. Digital information is extraordinarily reproducible, but digital civilization is also extraordinarily dependent upon infrastructure, electricity, servers, storage devices, cooling, networking, semiconductors, operating systems, file formats, data centers, maintenance, people, institutions, political stability, supply chains, physical security, and functioning electrical infrastructure. A library distributes risk. A centralized data center concentrates it. A well-designed digital archive can overcome some of this through geographic distribution, offline storage, multiple copies, durable media, and independent institutions. But that only reinforces the principle. Preservation requires redundancy. If a book is irreplaceable, destroying one physical copy after creating a digital copy should not be regarded automatically as an improvement. The responsible approach would be: preserve the physical artifact, create a digital copy, distribute multiple digital copies, maintain independent archives, and ensure that no single failure can erase the information. That is stewardship. 11. The electromagnetic problem. What happens when the machine is gone? The vulnerability becomes more obvious when civilization considers extreme infrastructure failure. Modern computing is dependent upon electrical and communications infrastructure. A sufficiently severe geomagnetic storm could disrupt electrical systems and communications infrastructure. An electromagnetic pulse could also damage or disrupt electronic systems, depending on its nature, intensity, geographic reach, and the vulnerability of the infrastructure involved. A Carrington-scale event would not magically erase every digital copy of every book. That claim would be too strong. Modern preservation systems can and should be designed with redundancy, but the broader principle is unavoidable. Digital information requires a physical substrate. The information is not floating in the air. It exists on physical storage media inside physical machines connected to physical infrastructure. If enough of that infrastructure is destroyed or disabled, access to the information can disappear. And this produces a profound paradox. A civilization may destroy a physical artifact because it believes its information has been safely transferred into a digital system, but the digital system itself may be more dependent upon a complicated chain of infrastructure than the original artifact was. The book needed a shelf. The AI system may need an electrical grid, cooling infrastructure, networking, storage arrays, semiconductor supply chains, software, maintenance personnel, and institutional continuity. The book may therefore be technologically primitive but structurally resilient. That is not an argument against digitization. It is an argument against mistaking digitization for stewardship. 12. Centralization creates fragility. The larger the system becomes, the more tempting centralization becomes. Centralization can produce extraordinary efficiency. One data center can process enormous quantities of information. One cloud infrastructure can serve millions of users. One corporation can coordinate massive quantities of capital and expertise. One AI model can incorporate information from an enormous corpus. But efficiency and resilience are not the same property. A centralized system can be extraordinarily efficient, while simultaneously creating a single point of failure. Civilization has learned this lesson repeatedly. Distributed systems are often slower and less efficient, but they can survive failures that destroy centralized systems. Libraries are distributed. Museums are distributed. Archives are distributed. Human memories are distributed. Languages are distributed. Cultures are distributed. Civilizations themselves are distributed. Humanity has survived for thousands of years partly because its knowledge did not exist in one building. A civilization that places its intellectual inheritance into a small number of extremely powerful technological systems may gain extraordinary computational efficiency while increasing systemic dependence. That trade-off deserves to be recognized. 13. The book is more than its information. There is another reason physical preservation matters. A book has provenance. It has material history. It can contain annotations, marginalia, dedications, ownership marks, corrections, paper composition, printing characteristics, binding techniques, physical evidence. A historian can learn things from the artifact that were never intended to be part of the text. A physical book can therefore contain information beyond its words. Digitizing the words does not necessarily preserve all of the information contained in the object. The artifact itself becomes evidence. This is particularly important for rare books, historical documents, scientific notebooks, manuscripts, and culturally significant materials. Destroying the physical artifact after extracting its text can therefore constitute an irreversible loss even if the text survives. A civilization that values knowledge should understand this distinction. 14. The economics of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence introduces the same problem on an enormous scale. AI promises extraordinary productivity. It can automate cognitive tasks. It can accelerate research. It can generate software. It can analyze data. It can assist scientists. It can improve logistics. It can produce information. It can potentially reduce the amount of human labor required to produce many goods and services. If these capabilities mature, AI could represent one of the largest productivity transformations in human history. But the technology itself does not answer the question of distribution. Suppose AI enables one worker to accomplish what previously required 10. Who receives the additional productivity? Does the worker receive more leisure? Does society reduce working hours? Do wages increase? Does everyone receive greater access to goods? Does the company simply eliminate 9 positions and retain the additional profit? Does ownership of the AI system become more valuable, while the bargaining power of labor declines? The technology cannot answer those questions. Ownership does. 15. The cost of the AI revolution. AI also requires physical infrastructure. Data centers require electricity. They require land. They require cooling. They require networking. They require semiconductors. They require construction. They require transmission infrastructure. They require enormous amounts of capital. This creates the possibility of another version of the same historical bargain. Citizens may be told, we need to build this infrastructure, because AI will transform the economy. Governments may provide incentives. Communities may provide land. Energy systems may be expanded. Public resources may be directed toward supporting the transition. Consumers may absorb increased costs. Workers may experience displacement. Society may bear transition costs. And the justification will again be, this will benefit everyone. But once the system is built, the question returns, who owns it? If the infrastructure and intellectual property are privately controlled, then society may have participated in creating a productive system whose economic benefits accrue disproportionately to its owners. The problem is not that corporations should never profit. The problem is the asymmetry between socialized sacrifice and privatized productive capacity. 16. The most important question about AI is not how powerful it becomes. The public debate often asks, how intelligent will AI become? How many jobs will it replace? How much will it increase GDP? How much will companies earn? How much electricity will data centers consume? How quickly will AI improve? These are important questions, but underneath them is a more fundamental question. Who owns the productive capacity that AI creates? If AI becomes capable of performing enormous quantities of economically valuable labor, then ownership of AI infrastructure could become equivalent to ownership of an enormous portion of the productive machinery of civilization. That would make the question of ownership more important than ever. If the machines can produce most of what society needs, then the traditional justification for requiring everyone to sell labor in order to survive becomes increasingly difficult to defend. If productivity rises enormously but ownership remains concentrated, however, the result could be the opposite. The machines become more productive. The owners become wealthier. Human labor becomes less necessary. But the people who do not own the machines become more dependent upon those who do. That would produce the ultimate contradiction of automation. Technology succeeds at making human labor unnecessary, while the economic system continues making human labor necessary for human survival. 17. The machine becomes free while the human remains bound. This is the deepest paradox. Machines do not need wages. They do not need weekends. They do not need retirement. They do not need health insurance. They do not need food. They do not need housing. They do not need to negotiate their rent. They do not need to purchase electricity with wages earned from another employer. Humans do. If machines increasingly perform the productive work of civilization while ownership remains concentrated, then humanity could enter a strange historical condition in which the productive system has been liberated from human labor, while human beings remain trapped within an economic system designed around labor. The machine becomes increasingly independent. The human becomes increasingly economically dependent upon the machine's owner. That is not technological liberation. That is technological feudalism. The purpose of automation should therefore be questioned. If automation exists primarily to increase the return on capital, then its success can coexist with greater insecurity for labor. If automation exists to reduce the amount of necessary human labor, then its success should ultimately appear as more human freedom. That means more time, more security, more access, more leisure, more education, more creativity, more participation, more ability to live without fear of economic catastrophe. The measure of success cannot merely be, how much more can the machine produce? It must also be, how much less must the human being sacrifice? 18. Stewardship versus ownership. This is where the concept of stewardship becomes central. Ownership asks, what can I control? Stewardship asks, what am I responsible for preserving? Ownership asks, how much value can I extract? Stewardship asks, how much value can I transmit? Ownership emphasizes the present. Stewardship incorporates the future. Ownership can terminate with the owner's death. Stewardship extends beyond the individual. A steward understands that some things are held temporarily for people who have not yet arrived. A library is a stewardship institution. An archive is a stewardship institution. A museum is a stewardship institution. A seed bank is a stewardship institution. A scientific archive is a stewardship institution. The preservation of cultural heritage is stewardship. The preservation of humanity's knowledge should be stewardship. And potentially, the preservation of humanity's accumulated digital knowledge should be stewardship as well. The steward does not necessarily deny private property. The steward recognizes that some things are too important to civilization to be treated solely as property. 19. The commons is not the absence of value. There is a persistent mistake in economic thinking that something cannot be valuable unless someone can exclusively own it. History disproves this. The atmosphere is valuable. Language is valuable. Mathematics is valuable. Scientific knowledge is valuable. Public roads are valuable. Open standards are valuable. Public libraries are valuable. The Internet's foundational protocols became enormously valuable precisely because they were not enclosed. The World Wide Web demonstrates the extraordinary economic power of a technology that can be widely adopted rather than privately restricted. CERN's decision to release the web openly allowed others to build upon it, modify it, distribute it, and create entire industries around it. CERN, the lesson is not that everything must be free. The lesson is that value and enclosure are not synonymous. Something can become extraordinarily valuable because everyone is permitted to use it. 20. The creator's intention matters. There is also a moral distinction between an inventor who chooses to create a private monopoly and a creator who deliberately refuses one. If a person creates an invention and says, "I want exclusive ownership and commercial control," that is a different moral circumstance. But if the creator says, "This belongs to humanity," then the subsequent enclosure of that contribution deserves scrutiny. This is why the insulin and web examples are so powerful. Banting's principle was explicitly universal. The web's foundational release was explicitly open. These are examples of creators or institutions recognizing that some technologies become more valuable when they are shared rather than enclosed. The question is therefore not, why didn't the inventor get rich? It is, why should anyone else get to become extraordinarily rich by enclosing what the inventor deliberately refused to enclose? That is the deeper issue. 21. Humanity as the original investor. There is an even broader argument. No modern invention emerges from nothing. Every invention stands on previous inventions. Every scientist depends on previous science. Every engineer depends upon mathematics. Every programmer depends upon previous programming languages and hardware. Every pharmaceutical discovery depends upon generations of biological knowledge. Every AI system depends upon mathematics, statistics, computing, semiconductor technology, electrical infrastructure, scientific research, language, literature, and an enormous inherited corpus of human knowledge. Civilization is cumulative. No individual begins from zero. This creates a profound question about the meaning of individual ownership. If the productive capacity of a modern corporation depends upon thousands of years of accumulated human knowledge, millions of prior discoveries, publicly educated workers, public infrastructure, legal systems, natural resources, and social stability, then the resulting wealth cannot honestly be understood as though it emerged entirely from the isolated genius of a corporation. The corporation may have contributed something enormous, but it is building on an inheritance. Humanity is the original investor, not necessarily through one check, through generations, through taxes, through labor, through education, through scientific research, through infrastructure, through sacrifice, through cultural transmission, through the lives of people who died before the resulting technology existed. This is why stewardship is so important. A generation does not create civilization from scratch. It inherits civilization. It modifies civilization. And then it passes civilization onward. 22. The difference between a gift and an enclosure. This allows us to define a gift more carefully. If I give you a book, I have transferred ownership. But if I place a body of knowledge into the commons, I have done something different. I have made it available to everyone. The distinction matters because a commons can be appropriated. A person can take something intended for everyone and establish exclusive control over it. That is enclosure. The tragedy is that enclosure can occur without the original creator ever having intended it. A scientist can release a discovery. An engineer can release a protocol. A writer can publish a book. A community can preserve cultural knowledge. A generation can create infrastructure. And later institutions can transform those contributions into proprietary assets. The original generosity does not automatically prevent later enclosure. Therefore, stewardship requires institutions capable of preserving the commons. 23. Preservation is a moral obligation. This is particularly important for knowledge. Knowledge that disappears cannot necessarily be recreated. If an artifact contains unique information, destroying it is irreversible. If a language disappears, reconstructing it may be impossible. If a scientific notebook is destroyed, the exact observations may be gone forever. If a historical testimony disappears, its perspective may never return. If a book exists in only one surviving copy, that physical object may represent an irreplaceable piece of civilization. Therefore, the destruction of knowledge is not merely the destruction of property, it can be the destruction of inheritance. This is why preservation should be treated differently from ordinary economic optimization. A corporation may rationally decide that maintaining physical copies is inefficient. A steward asks a different question: what happens if this is the last copy? That question is absent from purely transactional thinking. It is central to stewardship. 24. Efficiency is not the highest good. Modern institutions frequently treat efficiency as if it were synonymous with progress. But efficiency is only one value. Resilience matters. Redundancy matters. Accessibility matters. Independence matters. Durability matters. Intergenerational continuity matters. Plurality matters. Human control matters. A system can be extremely efficient and extremely fragile. A system can be inefficient and extraordinarily resilient. A physical book may be inefficient compared with a compressed digital corpus, but its inefficiency may be exactly what makes it resilient. There is no software update required to read a book. There is no electrical grid required. There is no cloud service required. There is no corporate subscription required. The book can survive its owner. It can survive the publisher. It can survive the corporation. It can survive the government. It can survive the internet. It can survive the data center. It can survive the collapse of the economic system that originally produced it. That is not worthless inefficiency. That is independence. 25. The danger of destroying the redundancy. When humanity destroys physical books after digitizing them, it may be destroying redundancy in pursuit of efficiency. The digital copy may be superior for search. It may be superior for distribution. It may be superior for computation. It may be superior for AI training. But those advantages do not make the physical copy worthless. They make the two forms complementary. The ideal preservation strategy is not physical or digital. It is physical and digital. Physical archives, digital archives, geographically distributed copies, independent institutions, offline storage, multiple formats, multiple custodians, multiple generations. The more valuable the information, the more important redundancy becomes. Civilization should not be optimizing humanity's memory for the lowest possible storage cost. It should be optimizing it for survival. 26. The data center is a new kind of library. There is therefore an opportunity to reinterpret the data center. A data center can be a library. It can preserve knowledge. It can make information accessible. It can allow humanity to search its intellectual inheritance at unprecedented speed. It can help future generations recover knowledge that might otherwise disappear. But a data center should not be mistaken for civilization itself. It is one repository, one technological layer, one generation solution. It should be integrated into a larger stewardship system. The physical books should remain. The digital copies should remain. Independent archives should remain. The knowledge should exist in multiple forms. No corporation should become the sole custodian of humanity's memory. No government should become the sole custodian of humanity's memory. No AI system should become the sole custodian of humanity's memory. No data center should become the sole custodian of humanity's memory. Because custodianship without redundancy becomes dependency. 27. The AI paradox, training on humanity, while replacing humanity. Artificial intelligence creates an especially profound version of the same problem. AI systems are trained using enormous bodies of human knowledge. Human beings wrote the books. Human beings conducted the experiments. Human beings recorded the histories. Human beings developed the mathematics. Human beings wrote the software. Human beings created the languages. Human beings built the internet. Human beings constructed the scientific institutions. Human beings created the cultural corpus. Then machines are trained on the accumulated result. The machine becomes capable of producing new economic value from humanity's inherited knowledge. That raises an unprecedented question. If AI is built upon humanity's accumulated intellectual inheritance, should the resulting productive capacity be understood solely as private capital? There is no automatic answer. But the question must be asked, because the alternative is extraordinary. Humanity spends thousands of years accumulating knowledge. Corporations build machines that ingest it. The machines become increasingly capable of performing economically valuable intellectual work. The owners of those machines capture the resulting productivity. The workers whose civilization created the underlying knowledge are displaced, and the people who created the original books may have no meaningful ownership over the system built from them. That is the possibility that stewardship forces us to confront. 28. The new form of tighten your belt. Every historical era has its own language for sacrifice. During war, there is a war on. During economic crisis, we must make difficult choices. During industrialization, progress requires disruption. During infrastructure expansion, we must invest for the future. During technological transitions, Some jobs will disappear, but new opportunities will emerge. During AI, we must build this infrastructure or fall behind. The language changes, the structure remains. The citizen is asked to accept present costs for future benefits, but the critical question remains: who owns the resulting future? If the future is owned primarily by those who already possess capital, then the sacrifice is not equally distributed. If everyone bears the cost, but ownership remains concentrated, then the public is effectively subsidizing the creation of private productive capacity. That is the central economic contradiction. 29. Socialized sacrifice and privatized productivity. The thesis can therefore be expressed in a single phrase: socialized sacrifice, privatized productivity. The population collectively absorbs the cost of transformation. The resulting productive system becomes privately controlled. The benefits are then distributed according to ownership. This pattern does not require a conspiracy. It does not require every participant to be malicious. It can emerge naturally from existing institutions. A government wants economic growth. A corporation wants investment. Investors want returns. Workers want wages. Consumers want cheaper goods. Scientists want discoveries. Engineers want technological progress. Politicians want visible accomplishments. Each actor can pursue rational objectives, and the system can still produce an irrational collective outcome. That is why the problem cannot be solved merely by identifying villains. It requires examining the structure. 30. The question of the shareholder. The shareholder is often presented as the ultimate beneficiary of productive enterprise. But the shareholder did not necessarily create the knowledge. The shareholder did not necessarily build the infrastructure. The shareholder did not necessarily perform the labor. The shareholder may not have paid for the education that produced the scientists. The shareholder may not have written the books from which the technology learned. The shareholder may not have created the mathematical concepts underlying the system. The shareholder may simply own the legal claim to the corporation. This does not make shareholders illegitimate. It does mean that ownership is a legal relationship, not proof of exclusive moral creation. And when the underlying asset is civilization's accumulated knowledge, the difference becomes enormous. 31. A civilization is a chain of gifts. Perhaps the most important realization is that civilization itself is a chain of gifts. We inherit language. We inherit mathematics. We inherit agriculture. We inherit writing. We inherit medicine. We inherit engineering. We inherit literature. We inherit scientific methods. We inherit roads. We inherit electrical systems. We inherit computing. We inherit telecommunications. We inherit the internet. We inherit knowledge from people whose names we will never know. Most of the things that make modern life possible were not invented by the generation currently using them. We are beneficiaries of dead people's work. That means we are also custodians of it. We did not create civilization. We inherited it. Our responsibility is not merely to extract as much value from it as possible. Our responsibility is to leave civilization at least as rich as we found it, preferably richer, and more resilient. 32. The moral meaning of stewardship. Stewardship therefore provides a different answer to the question of economic purpose. An owner asks, "How much can I get from this?" A steward asks, "What condition will this be in when I hand it to the next generation?" An owner asks, "How efficiently can I monetize it?" A steward asks, "How reliably can I preserve its value?" An owner can accept irreversible destruction if the financial return justifies it. A steward must consider the possibility that the thing being destroyed cannot be recreated. That is why stewardship is particularly important for knowledge. Knowledge is cumulative. Once destroyed, a missing piece can interrupt the chain. A civilization cannot assume that everything important can simply be recreated later. Sometimes the original source is the evidence. Sometimes the artifact is the evidence. Sometimes the redundancy is the preservation. 33. The future should not belong only to the owners of the future. The central contradiction of modern technological civilization can therefore be stated plainly. The people are continually asked to sacrifice for transformations whose productive benefits are subsequently distributed according to ownership rather than according to the collective nature of their creation. This does not mean every technological revolution is a failure. It means technological success is insufficient. A revolution is not complete merely because the machine works. A scientific discovery is not fully successful merely because it can be commercialized. An infrastructure project is not successful merely because it was built. An AI system is not successful merely because it becomes powerful. The ultimate test is what happens to human beings afterward. Are they freer? Are they more secure? Do they have more time? Do they have greater access to knowledge? Do they possess more control over the systems upon which they depend? Does the productive capacity of civilization reduce unnecessary human sacrifice? If not, then productivity has increased without corresponding emancipation. 34. The principle of universal benefit. The alternative is not necessarily that everything must be given away. The alternative is to recognize that certain foundational resources should be treated as humanity's common inheritance. That could include knowledge that is genuinely in the public domain, foundational scientific discoveries, essential medical knowledge, open standards, critical infrastructure, cultural heritage, historical archives, and irreplaceable human knowledge. The guiding principle would be, the more fundamental something is to humanity's collective capacity to survive, communicate, create, and flourish, the stronger the obligation to preserve it from exclusive enclosure. That does not eliminate private enterprise. It establishes boundaries around what should remain part of the commons. The World Wide Web demonstrates that enormous private industries can emerge from open foundations. Insulin demonstrates that scientific discovery can be treated as a contribution to humanity, rather than merely a private monopoly. Libraries demonstrate that knowledge can be preserved for people who have not yet been born. These are not utopian fantasies. They are historical examples. 35. The AI revolution needs a stewardship principle. Artificial intelligence should therefore be evaluated not merely as a commercial product, but as a potential new layer of civilization. If AI becomes a general productive technology, then its foundational resources will become extraordinarily important. Human knowledge, compute, energy, data, scientific research, algorithms, infrastructure, models, robotics, networks. These should not necessarily all be owned collectively, but civilization must ask whether any one institution should possess enough control over foundational AI infrastructure to become a gatekeeper between humanity and its own accumulated knowledge. The AI system should be a tool of civilization. Civilization should not become a raw material supply chain for the enrichment of the AI system's owners. That distinction is critical. 36. The data center should not become the tomb of the book. There is something almost symbolic about a physical book being cut apart, scanned, converted into data, and pulped so that a machine can learn from it. The book represents civilization's memory. The scanner represents technological extraction. The data center represents centralized computational power. The corporation represents ownership. The pulp represents what has been discarded as obsolete. And the question becomes, what exactly have we called progress? If the result is that humanity has made its knowledge more computationally useful, while simultaneously making the original artifacts more vulnerable to disappearance, then the process is incomplete. The appropriate response is not to reject the scanner, it is to refuse the destruction. Scan it, preserve it, index it, distribute it, study it, let AI learn from it, and then keep the book. That is stewardship. 37. The principle of redundant civilization. A resilient civilization should never have only one copy of something it cannot afford to lose. That principle applies to food, seeds, genetic diversity, scientific knowledge, historical records, cultural artifacts, software, energy systems, communications, and intellectual property. The goal is not maximum efficiency. The goal is survivability. A civilization that possesses 10 copies of something in 10 places may be less efficient than one centralized copy, but it is vastly more resilient. Humanity's knowledge should therefore be distributed across physical and digital systems. The physical book, the digital scan, the archive, the library, the cloud, the offline repository, the independent institution, the local collection, the international collection, the individual's bookshelf. All of these can become parts of the same preservation network. That is what stewardship looks like at civilizational scale. 38. The ultimate resource is not money. Money can be recreated. Factories can be rebuilt. Companies can be reorganized. Buildings can be reconstructed. Machines can be redesigned. But some knowledge cannot be recreated once lost. A manuscript destroyed cannot necessarily be rewritten. A language forgotten cannot necessarily be reconstructed. A scientific observation lost cannot necessarily be repeated. A cultural memory erased cannot necessarily be recovered. A unique book destroyed may represent an irreversible loss. Therefore, the most valuable things in civilization are not always the things with the highest market price. Some of the most valuable things are precisely those whose value cannot be recovered once they are gone. This is another reason stewardship must supplement economics. Markets are extremely good at assigning prices. They are not automatically good at assigning value to things whose loss is irreversible. 39. From ownership to responsibility. The ultimate transformation proposed by this thesis is therefore conceptual. We must stop asking only, who owns it? and begin asking, who is responsible for it? Who is responsible for preserving humanity's knowledge? Who is responsible for ensuring that essential discoveries remain accessible? Who is responsible for ensuring that technological infrastructure does not become an instrument of permanent dependency? Who is responsible for ensuring that productivity gains become human freedom rather than merely shareholder returns? Who is responsible for preserving the physical artifacts from which civilization learns? Who is responsible for ensuring that no single corporation, government, platform, or data center becomes the sole custodian of humanity's intellectual inheritance? The answer cannot simply be, whoever owns it, because ownership can change, governments change, corporations fail, markets collapse, technologies become obsolete, generations die, civilizations transform. Stewardship must therefore extend beyond ownership. 40. The real meaning of progress. Progress should not be measured solely by how much humanity can produce. It should be measured by how much unnecessary sacrifice humanity can eliminate. The purpose of agriculture should not merely be producing more food. It should be reducing hunger and unnecessary labor. The purpose of medicine should not merely be producing more pharmaceuticals. It should be reducing suffering and extending healthy life. The purpose of industrialization should not merely be producing more goods. It should be increasing human freedom. The purpose of the internet should not merely be generating enormous corporations. It should be expanding humanity's capacity to communicate and share knowledge. The purpose of AI should not merely be producing more economic output. It should be expanding what human beings are capable of doing, while reducing the amount of compulsory labor required to survive. And the purpose of civilization itself should not merely be accumulating wealth. It should be transmitting the inheritance of humanity from one generation to the next in better condition than it was received. 41. The final contradiction. This brings the entire argument back to its beginning. Humanity keeps inventing technologies that make human beings more productive. Then humanity keeps organizing those technologies so that most people remain economically dependent. We build machines to save labor. Then we require people to work to afford access to the products of those machines. We create medicine to save lives. Then access can become a commercial transaction. We create knowledge for humanity. Then access can become proprietary. We create open technologies. Then private institutions build enormous fortunes upon them. We build infrastructure collectively. Then ownership of the productive systems built upon that infrastructure can become concentrated. We digitize books to preserve knowledge. Then we risk destroying the physical artifacts that provided an independent form of preservation. We build AI to process humanity's accumulated knowledge. Then we face the possibility that the owners of the machines may control the productive value of humanity's intellectual inheritance. And throughout every transformation, the population is told some variation of the same thing. Sacrifice now. The future will be better. But if the future is always owned by someone else, then the people are never actually arriving in it. They are merely financing its construction. 42. The stewardship principle. The alternative begins with a simple principle. Humanity is not merely the producer of civilization. Humanity is the steward of civilization. Every generation inherits an enormous body of knowledge, infrastructure, culture, technology, and natural wealth that it did not create. Every generation has the opportunity to improve that inheritance, but it also has the capacity to destroy parts of it permanently. The moral obligation is therefore not simply to maximize production, it is to preserve possibility, to preserve knowledge, to preserve redundancy, to preserve access, to preserve independence, to preserve the ability of future generations to choose their own future. This means that certain things should be treated differently from ordinary commodities. A unique historical manuscript is not merely paper. A life-saving scientific discovery is not merely intellectual property. A foundational communications protocol is not merely software. A civilization's accumulated literature is not merely training data. Humanity's knowledge is not merely a database, it is an inheritance. And an inheritance is something one receives with an obligation to pass it onward. 43. The question we should ask of every revolution whenever a new technological or institutional revolution is proposed, society should ask 4 questions. Who is being asked to sacrifice? Who is creating the productive capacity? Who will own the resulting system? Who will inherit it when the current generation is gone? Those questions expose the difference between progress and extraction. A system that asks everyone to sacrifice, but gives ownership to a few is extraction. A system that creates abundance while increasing everyone's dependency is not liberation. A system that destroys irreplaceable knowledge in pursuit of efficiency is not necessarily preservation. A system that converts common inheritance into exclusive control is enclosure. A system that distributes productive capacity, so that people require less compulsory labor is liberation, and a system that preserves humanity's inheritance for generations that have not yet arrived is stewardship. 44. The future we should actually be building. The future should not be one in which humanity repeatedly sacrifices itself to build machines that make other people rich. The future should be one in which machines reduce the amount of sacrifice humanity requires. The future should not destroy books, because their information has been extracted. It should preserve the books and make their contents universally accessible. The future should not transform every discovery into a monopoly. It should distinguish between ordinary commercial inventions and foundational knowledge, whose universal availability benefits civilization. The future should not allow the ownership of productive infrastructure to become so concentrated that the people who depend upon it have no meaningful alternative. It should ensure that technological productivity produces corresponding human freedom. The future should not make civilization's memory dependent upon a handful of servers. It should distribute that memory across generations, institutions, media, and cultures. The future should not ask, how much can we extract from humanity? It should ask, how much can we preserve, create, and liberate for humanity? Conclusion: humanity's wealth belongs to the future too. The deepest problem is not capitalism. It is not socialism. It is not technology. It is not artificial intelligence. It is not corporations. It is not government. Those are mechanisms. The deeper problem is the failure to distinguish between wealth as property and wealth as inheritance. Humanity has accumulated an extraordinary inheritance. We inherited agriculture from people whose names are forgotten. We inherited writing from civilizations thousands of years old. We inherited mathematics from generations of thinkers. We inherited scientific knowledge from people who died long before modern medicine existed. We inherited industrial technology from generations of engineers. We inherited electrical infrastructure from generations of workers. We inherited computing from generations of mathematicians and engineers. We inherited the internet from generations of researchers. We inherited books from generations of authors. We inherited medicines from generations of scientists. We inherited the accumulated intellectual labor of civilization. And now we are building artificial intelligence on top of that inheritance. The question before us is not simply whether AI will make someone rich. It is whether AI will become another mechanism through which humanity's common inheritance is enclosed, or whether it can become another instrument through which humanity's inheritance is expanded, preserved, and returned to the people from whom it ultimately came. The distinction between those futures is the distinction between ownership and stewardship. Ownership asks, what is mine? Stewardship asks, what have I been entrusted with? Ownership asks, how much can I extract? Stewardship asks, what can I preserve and pass onward? Ownership asks, what can this produce for me? Stewardship asks, what can this produce for humanity? And perhaps that is the question every technological revolution should have been asking all along. Not, how much more can we make? But, how much less must humanity sacrifice? Not, who owns the machine? But, who benefits from what the machine makes possible? Not, who owns the knowledge? But, who is responsible for preserving it? Not, who can monetize the future? But, who will inherit it? Because civilization is not merely a machine for producing wealth. It is a chain of generations passing possibility forward. We are not the first people to create wealth. We are not the first people to inherit wealth. And we will not be the last people to depend upon it. We are temporary custodians of an inheritance created by people who came before us, and owed to people who came before them. The responsibility of our generation is therefore not merely to make the inheritance more profitable. It is to make it more accessible, more resilient, more abundant, and harder to destroy. If a book can be preserved, preserve it. If a discovery can save humanity, make it accessible. If a foundational technology can belong to everyone, do not enclose it unnecessarily. If a machine can eliminate unnecessary labor, let the benefit appear as human freedom. If society pays the cost of creating productive infrastructure, society should have a meaningful claim upon the productivity it creates. And if humanity creates knowledge, we should never casually destroy its original forms merely because a machine has learned how to read them. Because the ultimate wealth of civilization is not what we can sell. It is what we can remember. It is what we can preserve. It is what we can share. It is what we can build upon. And it is what we can leave behind. That is stewardship. And perhaps the greatest technological revolution humanity needs is not another invention. It is a change in the answer to the question, who is all of this for? The answer should finally be, humanity. Not merely its institutions, not merely its governments, not merely its corporations, not merely its shareholders, not merely the people who happened to own the machines during one particular generation. Humanity. Because if humanity is continually asked to sacrifice to build the future, then humanity must eventually have the right to inherit the future it built.